Welcome to Code Corner. This is a video series we do at Mayfield Renewables where we talk about codes and standards as they relate to the solar and solar plus storage industries. Today, going to look at 2023 National Electrical Code and specifically looking at Section 690.12 on Rapid Shutdown and the 3741 listing. So 3741 is a topic that I've spent quite a bit of time in recently. Still kind of a new listing for the industry. It's been out for a couple of years, but we're seeing it being used more and more. And this is actually a topic that we cover in much more in depth in a full hour class that I'll talk about at the end of this. So if you want to learn more about it, definitely have some resources for you to take a look there. So I'm going to kind of jump right into it with 2023 NEC. And for those of you that have been working in the industry, you understand rapid shutdowns, those requirements. And 3741 is a newer option that is being afforded to installers at this time to change how you might be meeting the rapid shutdown requirements for firefighter safety. So first off, I'm just going to jump into the pertinent information as it relates to 3741. And so it kind of gets drilled all the way down into right away into the conductors that are inside the array boundary. So you can see here the 2023 language in code. There are some changes from 2020. More or less, it's really hasn't changed functionally. A little bit has changed. So they talk about a PV-HCS there, so a PV hazard control system, and how you're able to meet that. And so you can see in the informational note, one way that you can do this, they do specifically call out UL 3741 PV hazard control. So 3741 has set up a listing method for manufacturers to list and test their components to in order to meet this reduction of electrical shock hazard to firefighters when firefighters are up on a roof working around an array and in harm's way. So that's what 3741 is all about, and kind of what we're trying to do by controlling conductors within our PV array. So taking a look in a picture, UL 3741, again, we're talking about those conductors that are inside the array boundary. So those, in this case, that circuit that is leaving the inverter, that's outside the array boundary. And so that is outside of what 3741 is going to talk about. And it's really all just about what's inside that boundary. So code actually has, the definition of an array. So it's all of the electrical and mechanical components that are, tied together. And then it tells us that a boundary is 1 foot in any direction from the array. So if you are using racking system that extends past the module itself, that is part of the array. So the racking system would be the edge of the array. So you get 1 foot from there. And so just depends on how the array is arranged, where that boundary starts and stops. And so you have to kind of just take a look at it and understand, case by case basis. But nonetheless, this 3741 listing is really, we're going to be looking at the conductors that are inside the array boundary. And it's important to note that 3741 was written around and tested for, again, firefighter safety and reducing the risk of shock to firefighters. And so that's really the big thing here that is happening with 3741. So as an installer, you have to understand what are the components that are required to install a 3741 compliant system. They being typically the racking manufacturers are the ones who are holding that listing, and they do it in conjunction with inverter manufacturers. So the reality is the way it gets put into practice is a racking manufacturer will dictate the installation practices, how you are going to protect and route the conductors. That's probably the biggest component of all this. How are you going to keep those conductors out of the way of a firefighter from, if they do happen to be doing firefighter activities, if they happen to trip and fall, land on an array, what is the shock hazard associated with that accident? And so the manufacturers are required to do that, do the testing, and make sure and show that under those scenarios, the shock hazard is kept at a reduced level, or is at a hazard level that's small enough to where the shock hazard is minimized for the firefighter. So a couple things that are straight out of UL 3741 that I want to show. And so, talking about the hazard levels that firefighters are exposed to. So you see there's a hazard level in this so this is a table from UL 3741, and there's hazard levels that are associated with it. And so maybe I should, back up a little bit. When part of the UL 3741 listing is what the codes committee, what the standards committee did. They worked with people like NREL, Sandia. They did some very heavy testing and figuring out what resistance values are, with a firefighter in full gear, difference between male and female, things like that, and being able to really understand in a scientific method what potential hazards are the firefighters, under when they come into contact with specific components. And so they've been able to come up with these hazard levels. The hazard levels are in direct relation to the current that would be flowing through a firefighter's body based on specific events, specific scenarios. And so you can see that we have hazard level 0, 1, 2, and 3. And so if you, as a manufacturer, can show that your hazard level is kept at very low values, zeros and ones, then your system will be 3741 compliant, I would say, much easier than, say, a system that has a hazard level of 3. Just because it has a hazard level of 3 doesn't mean it can't meet 3741. It just means it's going to take more stringent installation practices in order to make sure that the the shock hazard is properly mitigated for the firefighters. And so some of those ways that the manufacturers can do that, this is another graphic out of 3741, and you see there's some numbered items on this chart. Those items are identifying what components could be used in order to reduce the shock hazard. It's not saying you have to use any one of these or any of these in conjunction with each other, but you can use them. So number one, for example, are module level power electronics. A pretty good way to make sure that you keep the shock hazard low enough, controlling the voltage, making sure that there's not a voltage that's in excess of a certain value. Then you can't, the risk hazard, that risk analysis keeps that hazard very, very low. Other ways that are in here are, using controls, combination with controls in the inverters, and there's, switching devices that you can put in, over there at number 5. Number 6 is mechanical protection. So what we're seeing for a lot of our larger systems, our larger commercial 1,000-volt type systems, they're relying on mechanical protection to make sure to keep the firefighters, if and when they do trip and fall, come into contact with these components, that they're not actually going to be able to cut the conductors or things like that. So again, there's a lot to it. There's many elements to it, but this is kind of where 3741 is coming from, and some of the ways that we are being able to utilize that for these listed systems. So as I mentioned, this is really just a short snippet of a full hour-long class that we put together on 3741 specifically. So, if you'd like to learn more, highly encourage you to take a look at our website. We have other classes that are available for on demand as well. All of them are NABCEP credited, so you get CEUs for NABCEP when you take those courses. And then we also have live and in-person options available. So if you or your team are interested in receiving some education on various topics, we'd love to talk to you, see if we might be able to support you and your team. And then finally, if you have questions or comments on this or other Code Corners, you're welcome to reach out directly to us. Always welcome to hear topics that you may want to be hearing from us on, Code Corners specifically. And so feel free to reach out, give us that input as well. And so thanks for taking your time to watch today, and hope to see you soon.